Dorfer. That was an awesome speech. You bring so much passion. I've coached Olympic teams in London and Rio, where I was opposing Bruce. We're certainly a victim of not having Bruce's information. He certainly knew more things than what we did at the time. He's an amazing guy. He makes a massive difference to the local sales around here and abroad. I've had the privilege of being with him in a Japanese program the last little bit, and we're going to start a little Q&A with you, Bruce. So welcome.
Sounds good.
Thank you. So, from your experience, Olympic teams, America's Cup, Hobart races, Paralympic teams, what makes a great sale?
It's really the ability to learn from your mistakes. You can't expect to pick every little wind change and to have the skills you need across the board. But so long as you recognise when you are making a mistake, you learn from it. So it's not a mistake that you then repeat. And I've seen this at all levels, all the way from the average person to sort of out a bit of a fun sail, the cruising yachts, the offshore yachting, but also the Olympians and Paralympians. When we went to a new venue, when we went to London, of course it was a totally unknown area for us. And so here we have the people in London, and we can see there that a lot of skill, a lot of information is there for the sailors, and of course it's a lot for them to take in. And so it's really the ability to learn from all the experts that are out there to assist you, and to be willing to go and ask questions. So if you don't actually understand something, ask the question, because you won't get the answer if you don't ask the question.
Yep, very well put. In Weymouth, I was coaching for the British team. We thought we had the weather under control. We thought we knew everything, and we felt that we had the best weather information going around. However, Bruce was coaching for the Australian team, and there's a particular
through a couple of these.
Yeah, there's a particular day in Weymouth.
One more. Yep. The next one. That's it.
So there's a particular day in Weymouth where the 49er team was going out racing. So it was a crucial day for the outcome of the Olympics. So Nathan Outridge and Ian Jensen were sailing. Can you tell us a little bit about that day?
It's one of those things where, again, it got down to having faith and understanding in people giving advice. I've been working with Nathan and Goobs for a couple of years by this stage. We've gone through literally 7 regattas just leading up to the Olympics. And so this is the actual day. This is the 5th of August in 2012. There's a particular weather feature that was very important on this particular day. You wouldn't see it in any of the numerical models. You actually had to use this thing called your eyesight. Now, this is something that's not used a lot in some areas, but it's very, very important. Just look out there and understand what you're seeing. So in this particular case, the wind was from a specific direction. So for those that aren't familiar with the topography around the Weymouth area, you've got Portlandville, which is almost an island. It gets up to about 600 feet high, so it's a very blocky type of island. And diagonally across the bay, there's a little valley. It's called Osmington Mills. Now, at a certain wind direction, and that particular phenomenon only occurs 210 degrees to 220 degrees true. And you get an alignment of the edge of Portlandville across to this particular valley, and it gives you a line of pressure. A lot of the time you can't see it, but then on this particular day, on the other side there, you'll see that there is a satellite image showing there's this band of cloud. Now, it just happened that Nathan and Goobs were in a sailing course on the northern end of the bay, and we knew that that particular cloud feature was only going to be there for race 1. Race 2, the sea breeze was going to come through and break up the particular cloud. So what actually happened is I was literally down as Nathan and Goobs were about to go and take off, pointed out the cloud feature and said, you've got to get across just onto the western side of that cloud feature. That's where the wind will be. And so the race started, and so all the yachts took off in one direction except for Nathan and Goobs. They went out about 200 metres to the side, just on the western side of that cloud feature. By the first mark, they were about 100 metres in front, and they never looked back. They just went through there, totally blitzed it, so they got first place. For the second race, I told Nathan Goobs, it's going to be a sea breeze situation. That cloud feature will break. Do not go to the west, you've got to go to the other side. So race 2 started up. Lo and behold, all the yachts but 2 went out to the west. There was the Kiwis and the Aussies, the Kiwis weren't really sure why they had to go out the other side, but Nathan Goobs was doing it, so they thought they better follow it. And so off they went, and so first and second were Nathan Goobs were first, and the Kiwis were second, because they were the only ones that actually appreciated what was going on that day. So with those 2 wins, all Nathan Goobs had to do was not sink to get the gold medal. They were so far in front in those 2 firsts that you might recall that the actual medal race was a case of Nathan Goobs were out there, the fleet were doing their own thing, and they were sort of way out, trying to keep out of trouble. But they got a little bit bored, and they thought, okay, what the heck, we'll get in there and we'll try and race. And I think they actually came in 4th. All they had to do was just finish. And so that's now history. They had the gold medal. And they had the gold medal because they had faith in their understanding of what was happening with the weather. That was a real critical day, but they had faith in other days as well all the way through.
Yeah, it was an incredible moment, wasn't it, for Australian sailing?
It was, yeah.
We fast forward 4 years to Rio.
Okay, we'll move forward a couple more. So, okay, that's probably a good shot, but we'll go one more as well. One more. Okay, so we've got some of these characters here. There's one character actually just here. So the next slide is quite a good one because it really highlights. Yeah, so just the one shot. Okay, so most people look at this slide and say, that's a fantastic photo of the Paralympic gold medalists. I look at the slide and go, gee, that's a great shot of the sugar loaf behind them. Because that's really understanding its effect on the weather. It was absolutely critical for how all the sailors performed during the Olympics and the Paralympics. And firsthand, Colin had to really try to figure out what the effects were. Colin and I would sort of brief each other over, basically, I was in Australia, they were in Rio, we do these video calls, video briefings. And to his credit, he actually understood what I was saying, to the point where some of the mysterious things that happened around that area made sense to him, and it actually followed the theory, which is absolutely amazing. It's amazing when the winds actually follow the theory. One of the reasons for that is if you look at the topography of Rio, I should just point out that the medal, of course, is literally sitting right in here. So you've got Sugarloaf is over here, you've got a 2,000 foot high mountain there where the Redeemer statue is, and it all got down to understanding how deep the breezes were. So in this particular case, so long as the sea breeze was under 60 metres depth, then winds would flow down, they curve around Sugarloaf, and so you find that particular part of metal course would be favoured. However, once the winds got deeper than 60 metres, it would then flow through this little valley through the back here. So you just flowing through there. So instead of the pressure coming in around this way, it come in around there, and so all of a sudden it would be very quick. The favoured side of the course would flip from one side to the other.
Excuse me, what do you mean by deeper?
The depth of the sea breeze. It's the winds are in three dimensions, so it's the physical depth of the sea breeze circulation. Because in most instances you'll have an opposing flow above the sea breeze, and so it's physically how deep that sea breeze is. And so once it got to a certain depth, it was sufficiently deep to, instead of being forced to flow around that topographic feature, it would flow up and over it. The moment it did that, the favoured side of the course would alter, and it would alter very quickly. And so recognising that, there were a couple of flags you look at, but fortunately with Rio, they also had a lot of pollution. You say fortunately, well that would actually give you an idea of what the depth of the sea breeze was. And because the water quality was also absolutely appalling there, you had some idea what the currents were doing. You had the dirty brown currents, that was the harbour water. And then you had the incoming tidal water, which was clean. And so you knew that where the clean water was, that would be a current flowing in this direction. Where you had the dirty brown water, that was the current flowing in the opposite direction. And so you had some of these visual clues that you could use, and it was, the navigators essentially, it was their job to identify these features. It's quite a complex thing too, because things would change quite a lot. And it was the skill and the understanding that people such as Colin had that enabled them to get through there, get on the podium. So for Colin and his team, it was great understanding, able to go beat all the other nations, understanding better than what the Brazilians did, better than what the British did in that environment. It was very complex.
So Cole, I think you're being sledged by Bruce. I think you question your intelligence.
Well, one of the greatest challenges was having a weather briefing in the evening after you spend a day on the water, so you're tired, and you come back and all you want to do is basically have a feed and go and get some sleep. And then you've got to sit down for a Skype weather briefing. And I'm sure you've all gathered by now that Bruce is very passionate about the weather. And at the end of the day, I don't know how close we were sitting to the screen, but I always remember people would get their bean bags and just move away from the camera a bit so that you can line the bean bag and people would close their eyes a little bit every now and again. The head would not, so we'd have to wake people up. But it was certainly very challenging taking on board that level of detail. Once you applied the information, understood it, and it actually took quite a few years, I think, to really get my head around the information that you're delivering, because I too had access to your information in London, but I wasn't able to use it in nearly the same way as I was in Rio, and I think it just takes time. Maybe I'm a bit slow, but anyway, it's quite incredible when you get that information and then finally put the pieces of the puzzle together and then understand the current and the wind with the topography, and then you get that level of confidence and being able to sail your race and get the strategy right, which with the great coaches that we've got, and we had Grant over there at the time, and he was just able to just help us put it all together and go out and win.
Yeah, and I think one of the good things there too was because I'd actually met Colin before in London, and we had that kind of relationship, so that he wasn't afraid to ask questions. If he didn't understand something, basically, what do you really mean here? It's having that level of relationship with sailors that really made a big difference. That,
being able to trust what
that's
you're
right.
saying in the information, and it's a big call to say that the pressure's over that side and it will be there at 2:30 or 1:30, and all of a sudden you're thinking, well, do I go there? You know, how much do I trust that information? And when you get to that point and you go there, you think, well, that's it. Yeah, I do get it now.
Yeah, and that was one of the things with Rio. Probably a really learning thing for any of the juniors here is when the sailors went to the very first regatta that I was there in Rio, quite a few of them came back extremely distraught. You know, the winds were doing all these apparently weird and wonderful things. And they came back, how on earth can you sail in this particular area? So many local events and all the rest. And fortunately, I had a good relationship with the sailors, and they say, well, what did you see here? You know, why did this occur? And so from that feedback, we were able to come up with 5 generic weather types for Rio. So rather than having to say, it's going to do blah, 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 it's going to be type 3 tomorrow. So they go out there, okay, it's going to be a type 3, there'll be variations around that. But type 3 would mean a certain side of the course would be favoured for a certain period of time, and it may well transition later on. Or it might be a type 1, and we say, in case one side will be favoured the entire time. So it's having that simple understanding of what was essentially a very complex situation that really gave the sailors the confidence to the point they'd come back there and say, yep, you know, we picked it, you know, we were on the right side of the course, and you know, the others were just heading off doing the wrong thing on the opposite side of the course. And they became quite proud of their ability to understand what's going on in what was initially a very complex, mysterious weather situation.
And then we fast forward 3 years to an Olympic test event in Enoshima. Bruce is working with me for the Japanese team. But Matt Worm was also there in the lasers, and there's a special day that I remember quite well.
I might have been working with the Japanese, but I was still a member of the Republic of Western Australia.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about that? It was an amazing day.
Yeah, well, it's probably quite fortunate that the Japanese didn't really have a competitive laser sailing. So I had a fairly clear conscience that I could be helping Manami on the Japanese side and go over and help my fellow Republican with Matt in between. And so with Matt, we'd go through there and we'd tell Manami, here's Australia, and off she'd go. And in between, we could duck over and have a bit of a chat to Matt as to what was going on. And there's one day in particular, you might recall, it's that we're out there, we're both looking down the bay. All of a sudden, there's a sudden wind shift to the right. It went further right than we were actually expecting. I was going, I wonder what's causing that. So I just turned around, there's a rain shaft behind. So what had actually happened is the winds were coming along, the rain shaft is cold and dense, and so it acts like a hill. The winds were literally going to bend around, were bending around it, which led to that right wind shift. The critical thing was, all the sailors were saying, well, it's shifted so far to the right, will it continue? And the answer was no. It wasn't going to do that. I was quite confident, knew exactly what it was. We told Manami, and she didn't really understand why, but she just went for it. And we also told Matt. And so that kind of knowledge sort of feeds in and can really help to set the tone for the regatta. And unfortunately, I've known Matt for a while, and he had confidence in what I was saying. And so between us, with flitting from the Japanese team to sort of assisting Australia back to the Japanese team, it kind of worked quite well.
Yeah, and for those that aren't aware, that regatta played a pivotal part in Matt's selection for the Olympics. And it was a controversial decision at the time. He was selected and won the gold medal. So he did a great job for a young fella from here.
Yeah, it's good to see his success.
Yeah, amazing. Fremantle 420 Worlds, Monique and there and World 420 champions. At Fremantle, everyone says you've got to go left. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a case of people always know what's best in your local area, and that's why in Weymouth you had all the British saying, you do this, but unfortunately they didn't actually know why you did this. And so it's a case of you have to understand what was going on to make the right decisions. And so in Fremantle, okay, you go left if you're sailing in the normal location. And for 420s in this case, they had one course that's much further out than normal. And so in that particular course, Garden Island came into play. And so when the sea breeze was coming through again, it was the depth of the sea breeze was a critical thing. While it was relatively shallow, the sea breeze would flow up the western side of Garden Island, bend around and give you a right shift. And so instead of favouring the left, it favoured the right. And that would be the case until the sea breeze became deep enough to then flow over the top and went back to the usual left favoured shift. And that was repeated multiple days in that particular regatta. Made all the difference. It was one of the things we said, look out for this. It should be there. And lo and behold, it was. And it really did help to sort of play into the Australian team's hands.
Yeah, that would have been terribly hard for Nair and Monique because they've sailed at Fremantle for a long time and they're used to going left. And so here they are, they've got this crazy guy saying go right. And
I'll be caught with us.
They became world champions, so amazing. There's a little bit more to Bruce. He's working in Saudi Arabia, and it was an interesting thing. Would you like to talk a little bit about what happened there and your devious tactics?
Yes, for 4 years I was in Saudi Arabia. I did work as the scientific assistant to the vice chairman of the IPCC, so that's climate change. And so that was a big aspect of my work over there, as well as setting up their observation networks. But the first Gulf War happened to break out when I was over there, so I was the only Western meteorologist there. I was being funded by the United Nations Development Program, so I was actually already on the United Nations payroll at that time when the Gulf War broke out. And there's a particular problem with the first Gulf War. It's this stuff called chemical weapons, weapons of mass destruction. Now, in the second Gulf War, there's a lot of discussion and so on about did the Iraqis have it or did they not. For the first Gulf War, they definitely did have it. I spoke to the people who sold the chemical weapons to the Iraqis. The Iraqis were meant to use it against the Iranians, but they didn't. So we actually knew what they had. Several types of chemical weapons. Critical thing with chemical weapons is the last thing you want with a chemical weapon is for the chemicals to come back over you. To give you an idea of just how deadly chemical weapons are, if I had a little syringe to Born DX, this big, I released it here, everyone in this room would die. That's the concentration you get, so you don't need very much of this stuff. And so one thing that I've been spending years doing while I was over there was setting up the comms networks, and so we try and get all the weather information out to everyone. Well, for the Gulf War, the first thing we did was we pulled out the pin to the supply of information to the Iraqis. We hijacked their satellite ground station, so instead of being delivered to Baghdad, it was delivered to Jeddah, where it was based. And also, we set up a room where people were going through that and diligently changing all the weather observations to make sure that there's a southerly at all times blowing down towards the Iraqi area. So literally, the Iraqis could not possibly release the chemicals because the weather information was telling it was going to blow back over them. And it was sufficiently good that it gave the Allies enough time to get sufficient ground troops and get all the chemical gear and so on in position before they could then be phased out. So it was something a little bit different. It wasn't on my CV, I wasn't meant to be doing this, but it was just one of those little things we kind of had to adapt to at the time.
Just in case you're not aware, Bruce is a good guy to have on your side. You've got 3 degrees, a great track record in helping sailors win gold medals. What are one or two key messages that you can give the sailors out there?
One of the key things would be that the weather is a very important factor in racing. If you're competing at the highest level, you really have to make sure that you understand. You have to be a very good sailor. You have to have top equipment. You have to make sure mentally that you're on tune, but you also have to understand the weather. Because if you don't have that weather understanding, you won't get a medal at the Olympics or the Paralympics. You've got to have that understanding. The other thing I'd say is very critical is you don't have to understand everything about the weather. All you have to do is understand more than what your competitors do about the weather. The rest of it is a bit immaterial. And so there's a couple of key things. I would say that it's quite possible to learn from your mistakes. And so you get out there, and if the wind is doing something, it's doing it for a reason. It's not like a politician where you would be doing something for no reason at all. The wind will actually do it for a reason, and so it's a case of saying, okay, I missed it this time, and then stand back after and saying, you did it this time because of this reason. And that's one of the things where I've kind of enjoyed the Olympics and Paralympics, because we had that two-way dialogue. When some strange things happened, we used it as a learning experience, so that when it happened next time, we're more ready for it. And so it's always been one of those things, you never finish learning. I'm still learning myself, and I'm one of the old buggers these days.
Hey, Philippa, do we have time for questions, or are we running?
Well, I know I've got a question. But yes, we just have to be careful because of an aeroplane trip. Bruce, just wondering, I mean, when you go to a regatta in various places in the world, I quite like to get hold of the past year's weather charts. Is there any point? I mean, does it repeat itself, or?
If you look at past year's charts, most of the time it's
No,
a good
past
thing.
several years'
Several
charts.
years, yeah.
Yeah.
Depending where you go, most places will not have the same weather from one year to the next. They tend to go through these cycles depending on what the influences are. The cycles, for example, if you look at the Pacific Ocean, the Indian Ocean dipole, the ENSO cycle is typically about 7 years, and so you're looking for charts 7 years ago, or a corresponding period, and they're the ones you've got to be looking for. One of the things I try and look out for are the sea surface temperature anomalies. They tell you a lot, and I spend a fair amount of time with, you've got this great tool called Google Earth. You get through there, you can check out the topography, you can get through there, even things like the vegetation. So if you go to a place like Aarhus in Denmark, and it's kind of surprising. You've got this flat country, and you think, okay, there aren't any local effects. Whereas in fact, there's one spot there where they've got a quite dark pine forest. And if you heat up that pine forest, if it's a sunny day, it literally acts as a little thermal tube, if you like, and it draws the wind in. So if you go in close to that pine forest, you actually can pick up an extra knot or so of wind quite consistently if it's a sunny day. And so just going around and just picking up little things like that. If I go to a new location, if I'm forecasting for a new location, I tend to go look at Google Earth. I do look at some of the past history. I'll normally go back, someone's 10 years to get a bit of a feel for the kind of variations you can get. But just understanding the topography, I look at sea surface temperatures as well, because they can be big drivers. You find if you go to some of the European lakes and so on, you find that the water can be very cold in places, and so the winds can actually literally become unlocked from the ocean. And so you have to sort of recognise where it's really cold, where it's warm. Critical thing we use from Sydney to Hobart is you've got to go get the yachts in the right spot. That's why Blackjack won the last 3 races I've been forecasting for them. Got them in just the right spot, and you when to get to that spot, what to look out for. And just understanding what the sea temperatures are doing can be quite important.
Thank you.
Yeah, just one more.
I'm just wondering, I'm sure you've got a few, but what's your favourite book, or what one would you recommend for any sailors? What's the go-to?
I think the wind strategy book is still the best one that's out there. So that's what wind strategy.
Stuart Walker?
Hey?
Stuart Walker?
Yeah, Walker. Yeah. And so it's a really good one. I've actually been telling myself when I retire, I was going to retire by now, but I was going to write what I call a proper weather book. I've actually co-authored 4 books to date, but they've all been very generalised, and so I haven't really gone into the details. So I've actually told myself it's one of those things I want to do.
Yeah, I'd agree. They're a magnificent read. What I've learned is you can't really go anywhere without Bruce. If you're a sailor. He's good at sledging, Colin, myself, other people.
I'll search anyone.
I'd like you to thank Colin Harrison and Bruce Buckley.